Hello there. My name is Monica Burns, and welcome to Technology Essentials in Education. Today's episode is all about practical examples of AI in education with Caroline Haebig. And today I'm chatting with Caroline, who I've known for over a decade. She's the coordinator of teaching and learning for a K-12 district in Wisconsin and an ISTE author. You might know her from her books, The Maker Playbook, or the newly updated Learning Supercharged Second Edition. As I mentioned, I've known Caroline for a long time, and I always appreciate her perspectives on education technology and how it can really transform learning experiences for students. So, today we talk about practical examples of AI in education with plenty of strategies you can try out right away. This episode is brought to you by Jotform. Jotform provides an all in one solution to streamline administrative tasks, enhance community engagement, and foster innovation. Using their no code drag and drop forms and workflows, your teams can securely collect and store data, automate tasks, and collaborate on team resources. Educational institutions are also eligible for a 30% discount on Jotform Enterprise. Head to their website to learn more. Jotform.com/enterprise/education. Welcome to the podcast. I am so excited to chat with you about some practical examples of AI in education. But before we get into all of that, can you share a bit with listeners? What is your role in education? What does your day-to-day look like?
So I'm Caroline Haebig. I am the coordinator of teaching and learning for a K-12 school district in Wisconsin. And I have a unique role because I get a variety of projects. So within the recent past, some initiatives I've really worked to develop and launch have to do with design thinking, maker spaces, engineering focus, as well as looking at integrating computer science K-6 for every student, which is really exciting. And then all the way to continuous improvement work. So looking at how can we maximize our curriculums and our resources in the best ways possible to meet the needs of teachers, students, while meeting standards in developing common assessments. So
Mhm.
um, that and really looking at what's also coming, what's new, so AI, and how do we help prepare teachers, students, and families to really embrace and maximize changes in practical ways.
Yeah, I love that idea of maximizing changes because things are moving, things are changing really quickly, and really making the most of what is out there and available is a big part, of this conversation. And today we're talking about AI in education. So, what misconceptions about AI do you see most often in K-12 classrooms right now?
I think the biggest misconception is that sometimes people over assume what a tool can do or their
Mhm.
hopes for what a tool can do at its present state or time. And I also think that given that, people also don't think about how these technologies operate and how they work and what that means for being responsible, whether you're an adult, whether you're a student, thinking about data privacy, as well as I also see people saying, oh, wow, it's something new. We have to like really think about how this
Mhm.
works and not thinking about like what are practices, policies, guidelines that we already have in place
Yeah.
for technology in general, and then building on that. So I would say those are the three things that I see kind of that mislead people or misconceptions they have.
Yeah, and that's such a great point about just the way we interact with some of these tools, even just from a professional standpoint, right? When we're trying to do some instructional planning or get some support, we hit that wall of, well, couldn't it do this or should it be able to do this? Well, there might be aspects of that bigger task that it can take on, but it's not going to go from A to Z, right, automatically just because you opened up ChatGPT or Gemini and asked it to do something. And I love that emphasis too on we have this set of guidelines already. We're already thinking about technology use, and this might not be exactly the same when we bring AI into the conversation, but there's definitely some parallels to lean into. So as you think about what you're seeing in your role or things you're hearing from some of your colleagues, can you share a few examples of how students are using AI in classrooms today? Are you seeing this or are you seeing something like adjacent to it? What have you noticed?
I see a variety of things. I think a lot of places are starting with teacher use for supporting their professional practice, which is important. And I think thinking about like how can we connect it to the work that we already have to do.
Mhm.
When it comes to and we'll get more into like that teacher piece, but when it comes to looking at like for students thinking about how might teachers and students use it to create resources to support studying, to support
Mhm.
retrieval practice within learning. So, how do kids practice information, recalling it from memory, which and then in turn helps them get
Yeah.
build learning and understanding. Also using it for experiences to build skills around lateral reading. So, hey, we get an output, or we're searching for something using AI to generate a summary or to lead us to our next step. Using it as a springboard then to teach, well, what is lateral reading? Reading across sources, using that critical thinking to compare results and synthesize a variety of informational sources. And then also looking at what are some of the features that kids can use to get creative. And what's kind of neat there is I know one thing a lot of teachers find is that younger students will say, how cool can I make something look, right? Whether it's
Right.
a poster or a slide deck and
Yeah.
getting lost in the features
Hmm.
and not focus on the sharing of those learning outcomes. And a creative thing I've seen with students using AI is, they've done the work, they've created the product that shows that, but then trying those enhancements and
Hmm.
not getting too lost in that and keeping the learning at the forefront. AI kind of gives you a little of that wow factor, but then also um, you spend the time on showing the learning and then
Hmm.
can use some of those features. So that and to support brainstorming I've seen as well as kind of building on ideas and going from there. So it's just been really interesting to see the different angles that
Hmm.
these tools can be incorporated.
Yeah, lots of options for teachers who might bring something into their classroom that's student facing, that is AI powered. And yeah, as you're talking about the enhancements, I just think back to being in a computer lab with my fifth graders and trying to get them to wait to do like the PowerPoint transitions,
Yeah.
like that's the last thing. I promise we're gonna have 5 minutes at the end of the last day for you to add in something, right? Or play with those. And so
Hmm.
that might be one angle, right, for one group, or maybe some of that, brainstorming or idea gathering. So such great examples. And when schools, ask about and educators may come to you, right, asking about acceptable versus unacceptable AI use. What guidance do you typically offer them?
I think when it comes to looking at acceptable use, unacceptable use, it's about creating that clarity
Hmm.
and starting with educating any user, whether they're a professional, whether they're a young person or a student, and thinking about like how do these tools work and building understanding around that. Because I think knowing how machine learning works and how our models, just surface level, but
Hmm.
important, is leans into then how those conversations of what is acceptable, what's responsible, what information, should we put in, should we not put in? What are parameters and guidelines that you already have in your district about age, right? And
Hmm.
using different tools. And I think the big thing is like creating opportunities to build on what you currently have outlined for acceptable use, specifically providing learning and education around how these tools work. And then also looking at like what are avenues for teachers or even students in some cases to provide like, hey, I'm curious about this tool or app that can do XYZ or feature. And
Yeah.
then do you have a practice in place that then allows it to be vetted and explored, so that users also can give some insight to what they're curious about, what their wants and interests may be, to dig deeper, and then also looking at picking specific features
Hmm.
with AI fueled tools that help us to think about like what's something that we typically need to do, what's a pain point,
Yeah.
or what is a way to increase efficiency and focus on that. So when it comes to acceptable use and guiding that, I always tell people like look at what your current guidelines are, think
Hmm.
about building that understanding so we can make informed choices, decisions, allow for avenues that provide people with opportunities to give their curiosities and insights some exploration, and stick to things that need to be tackled first, right? That we know people are already working on. Like, don't come out of left field. Think about where things people are already doing and needs they already have.
I think that really leans into this idea of, what are those practical examples? Like what's already happening? What's a use case that a teacher has found, like you said, to address a pain point? Now let's look at that, right, as it connects back to our guidelines, right? Is there something missing there, or is there something that we need to maybe revisit?
And one last thing I would add is also tap into some of the resources out there, like Teach AI, Digital
Hmm.
Promise. Like, what are some of the literacy, AI literacy practices that are being promoted, or resources like Google's Guardian Guide to AI that you can then implement in your work? So, not everything has to be done from scratch either. And I think that's a good reminder as well.
Yeah, and just that idea that you might find something that you really like, and then maybe you connect with a school or district that also really likes that same thing, and you have some
Mhm.
common vocabulary to brainstorm. Like we are also a school, right, with this kind of breakdown of our schools, within our district or whoever it might be, like finding someone that might have some commonalities and is also like using a particular set of norms that you can bounce ideas off of. And one of the things I really appreciated you mentioning was opening that conversation for colleagues to say, this is what I'm seeing, this is how I'm using it, like having that curiosity supported. And I think that also comes back to this idea of being transparent, right, with use cases.
Mhm.
So, what routines or norms have you seen work well for fostering responsible and transparent AI use with students?
So I think when it comes to anyone, but especially with students, I think determining the role that we want AI to play and having clarity around that's really important. So, for example, in I was thinking about this question actually as I was working on the book Learning Supercharged version
Mhm.
2, and looking at like laying out like what are ways that AI tools or features can be used. So for example, being concrete and providing students with a guide that says, hey, you can use it to develop your thinking, provide feedback, using it to summarize, but in conjunction with your own reading. Or if you're looking at generating new content, how do you do that? Say, hey, we know flashcards can be helpful.
Mhm.
Like, how can you use it for that? Or creating for teachers, yeah, like fill in the blank notes or teaching then kids
Mhm.
what are some helpful study strategies and then how can they maybe use these tools to do that. I also think it's really important to call out directly, like, what are examples of inappropriate use or
Yeah.
that you don't want, say, blatantly saying like passing off AI created content as your own or accepting revisions
Mhm.
without critically analyzing them or thinking about them, asking AI to rewrite something for you or to answer questions for homework. I think being is clear,
Yeah.
is very helpful and it's kind. And also, I think it's important, and I've seen this at higher ed too,
Mhm.
stating like if you're going to use AI, and we've already outlined appropriate and inappropriate uses, what are also things you need to do with citation? I
Mhm.
see, being able to disclose when AI is used, also maybe describing what value it brought to your work and
Yeah.
bringing in some of that
Mhm.
metacognitive piece. I've seen that a lot. And then how might it contribute to your academic growth? So I think the biggest thing is like when we're thinking about fostering responsible use with students, be very clear about, what are examples of appropriate use, examples of inappropriate use, and
Mhm.
then if we use these tools, how do we then cite or address or explain the value that add that they had to learning?
A quick note from the presenter of today's episode, Jotform. Jotform lets you build a form in minutes. Student survey forms, homework submission forms, online quizzes, and so much more. You can start from scratch, or if you want to get a head start, check out their collection of free form templates designed with teachers, schools, and districts in mind. Learn more about Jotform and how educational institutions can get 30% discount on Jotform Enterprise. Head to their website to learn more. Jotform.com/enterprise/education. Yeah, and just being specific, right? We can't assume that someone is going to, right, share, right, their use cases if we haven't talked about, right, the why they might or examples of how to have that conversation. I'm glad that you mentioned the citation piece too, because I think that's something that's great for teacher modeling, right? Even if you might not ask your second graders to use an MLA citation, like maybe put that below the image, right, that you generated. And, MLA, I'm working with a group of Colorado educators right now, and, we kind of went through their guide to say, like, these are the suggestions that they have for citing this type of content, right? Like, there's resources out there that we can adopt, right, as a school community to have that level of transparency, on talking about, what's possible with AI. So I'd love to hear from you a bit about constructing AI prompts through a cognitive science lens. I know that's something that you're working on. What does that mean in practice for
Mhm.
teachers?
So the really great thing is cognitive science research has shown us over and over again what has been effective for not only getting information into kids' heads, but more importantly, helping them to be able to get it out and apply it with great meaning and understanding, to have high impact learning. Specifically, there's three strategies that we know the research really shows as being highly effective. One is retrieval practice. So this is um, looking at what is in your current memory and then being able to get information out.
Mhm.
So creating more activities where not only obviously we have to share information, present information, have kids engage with new information, but then equally spending the time on like retrieving it and helping them to have opportunities to review in a way where they have to bring that information out. Also, in conjunction with that, looking at spacing, right? So,
Mhm.
how do we learn new information and then still practice getting information that we are practicing then over time or bringing back? And then looking at interleveling, which is then mixing, say, I actually used to teach AP psychology. And I mean, these are strategies that really get you through. I remember thinking, like, how are kids going to remember 18 chapters worth of content by the end of the year to perform well on a test? These are the strategies that
Mhm.
really can help get us there. So, taking intentional opportunities where students can discriminate then also between similar topics and then pick out what is the correct answer, why, in developing those skills about how they categorize and can retrieve and think about knowledge.
Mhm.
Um, when it comes to prompting, this is where things I think get really interesting because we know that our outputs are only going to be as good as our inputs. And as
Mhm.
professionals, I think we need to look at what are high impact practices, strategies, what's known, and bring that into our prompt. So, for example, starting with being specific, like blank grade level students are working towards the specific academic standards and like literally putting that in there. The essential question that they're focused on, putting that in there, and then create a asking, in your prompt, say create an activity that incorporates retrieval practice to help students improve their learning within that standard. So I
Yeah.
think the more we can bring in with those pieces we know, so we know the standards, we know the learning targets, and then if you're still starting off and you're thinking about retrieval practice, like asking it to give you some ideas, the AI to give you some ideas there. Also looking at considering including more detail, so naming and specific instructional strategies. So if you're finding some that you know are highly effective, but to make it more efficient, teachers using fill in the blank notes for those
Yeah.
times of explicit teaching. How can you use AI to help then create those types of resources, as well as like graphic organizers that can be used
Mhm.
for scaffolding, and then providing the space for students to then you know, say, hey, what are those three things that I remember from this specific lesson or this specific practice? And I think, looking at how can AI be prompted in ways where we are intentionally putting in the things that we know are high impact, but maybe we
Yeah.
don't have the time to like think of the details, it can help jumpstart our work as teachers. And I also think I'm thinking more just like what are, specifics,
Yeah.
and also listing things of like what are some things that students may struggle with.
Yeah.
Um, and then putting that in. So common misconceptions, and
Hmm.
then saying creating an activity where insert, grade level students are using, say, reconstruction. That's in our cognitive science strategy, where, whether it has to do with how a neuron fires, or the life cycle of a plant, or anything that has to do with like chronology, and thinking of like what are activities or review pieces that can then support students in that work, and recalling that information can be really helpful. And then something is we talk about a lot in education, but exit tickets.
Yeah.
So, prompting AI to say, create an exit ticket with 3 to 5 open-ended questions, insert the grade level, to retrieve key facts or information learned, and prompting the AI like tool to keep that student-friendly language,
Hmm.
looking at it about, what are ways to help them develop that thinking. I think the better we can get in the prompt, the more we can bring in specific strategies from cognitive science and research, even if you don't know what that may look like. AI can maybe kind of help kick in that brainstorming piece
Hmm.
to bring those together if you're at least at a surface level using some of those key vocabulary terms,
Yeah.
whether these be specific like exit tickets, or reconstruction, all the way to something as simple as retrieval
Yeah.
practice.
And I think for someone listening here who is maybe jumping in for the first time, maybe has felt frustrated with the output they've got in the past, or is looking for the right way to position this, type of technology use to their colleagues, what you've shared is so crucial. Like lean into what you know is a best practice, what's always worked, that you really have seen have a high impact, but now we can really scale that impact and reach more students. And you need to have some context on best practices for the content, the pedagogy, what that group of kids needs. So super practical for someone who's, rethinking what their prompting structure might be. So as we kind of finish up together today, I want to make sure everyone knows about your new book. Can you tell us a bit about your publications, what motivated you to create this new resource, and some of your past resources for educators?
So, one thing I'm really excited about is the new book coming out March is Learning Supercharged version
Mhm.
2. And what's really exciting about it is that it takes a variety of topics. Whether you're curious about experiential learning, project-based learning, design thinking, all the way to game-based learning, AI. AI is actually infused in
Mhm.
every chapter, and thinking about like elements of AI and how do they support that work. Also, looking at that cognitive science lens and how that applies. So, hey, here are some of the pitfalls that we see in the research with project-based learning.
Yeah.
What are ways to improve those?
Mhm.
And in thinking about this book, I feel like a lot of times teachers don't have the time to say, hey, I'm going to go dig up these academic articles and then think about what they mean in my
Right.
world.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work.
Hmm.
So one thing I like about this book is that it's very rooted in the research, but then I tried to do it in a way where it's like, here are things you can actually do. So, for example, in the AI chapter, talking about prompting, I give example prompts that people can actually like use and then fill in their details
Yeah.
to just kind of jumpstart that work. It also has a companion site where there's a lot of uh, uh, documents and templates that people can make copies of and then modify or translate into other tools that they like to use. And because people, once again, don't have the time to do the legwork. And I see in my practice that that's like a barrier for
Yeah.
people.
Hmm.
So anything, I really tried to think about in working through this book, what are barriers people face, whether it's like time to dig into the research, time to think about, crafting that prompt, because that takes a lot of time,
Yeah.
and then templates to get started and modify, and really, provide a resource, a book, the companion materials that get to that end in mind.
Nice. And I think for someone who, again, diving in, revisiting this topic, all of those additional resources can really help them be successful, for this school year and the upcoming school year too. So I'm going to link out where people can follow along with your work. But for anyone who's like on the move or listening to this and making a mental bookmark, where can people connect with you? Where can they learn more about your work?
So, ISTE as well as other places are great places to start. Believe it or not, I'm actually open to social media conversations on Facebook, Instagram, as well as email.
Mhm.
If people are like, hey, I'm curious about this or I want some direction, I'm always happy to have a conversation and just hear also what people are doing that they find inspiring. So those are just some of the pathways. I'm out there.
Perfect. Well, I will make sure to link out to everything. Thank you so much for your time today and for sharing all these great strategies with listeners. It was so much fun chatting with Caroline today. Let's finish up this episode with a few key points to help make this edtech easy. Many misconceptions about AI stem from overestimating what tools can do and underestimating how they actually work. Students are beginning to use AI for studying, summaries, brainstorming, and even creative enhancements. Clear, acceptable use guidelines can build on existing tech policies and emphasize responsible, informed use. Transparency about how and why AI is used, including when to cite it, is essential for helping students build healthy habits. Remember, you can connect with Caroline and learn more about Jotform by finding all the info in the show notes right below where you're watching this video. A big thank you to Jotform, the presenter of today's episode. To learn more about Jotform and how educational institutions can get a 30% discount on Jotform Enterprise, head to jotform.com/enterprise/education.